Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
And Karen, our focus is on the markets this morning as we head into the final full week of trading in 2024. Investors get key economic data this week with retail sales due out tomorrow and November's core PCE, the Fed's preferred gauge of inflation, on Friday. Traders also have a slew of central bank meetings to follow. Rate decisions from the Bank of Japan and Bank of England come after Wednesday's Fed meeting. Goldman Sachs economists have a note out this morning saying they expect a 25 basis point reduction from the Fed this week, followed by a pause in January. Consensus is a likely cut on Wednesday, but former New York Fed President Bill Dudley says the path for rate cuts in 2025 remains unclear.
Last time in September, they had four 25 basis point rate cuts in 2025. So this time will be 2 or 3. And second, I think Powell will talk about how, inflation is a little bit sticky. The economy is doing really well. You'll probably see some upper revisions of the Fed's estimates of so-called R-star, the neutral rate. So I think all those things together will make it pretty clear that, January is probably going to be a pause.
And former New York Fed President Bill Dudley also tells Bloomberg the Fed expects tax cuts from the first Trump administration to be extended and will take that into account as it decides how to ease monetary policy next year. Stick with Bloomberg for live coverage of this Wednesday's Fed decision. We'll bring you a special edition of Bloomberg Surveillance. The Fed Decides with Jonathan Farrow, Lisa Abramowitz, and Tom Keene on Bloomberg Radio and television.
Well, in politics, Nathan, much of the focus remains on policy and how a second Trump administration will implement proposed tax and tariff policies. To be specific, former Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn told CBS's Face the Nation this weekend he expects taxes to be a major focus of the incoming administration.
We do know that taxes will be taken up by this Congress in this session. We know that they're going to have to deal with the personal side of the equation, because if not, the personal side will revert back to the pre-2017 tax code. I don't think anyone wants, on either side of the aisle, wants to go back to the prior tax code.
Former Trump economic advisor Gary Cohn was speaking on CBS's Face the Nation, which you can hear every weekend right here on Bloomberg Radio.
Also in focus, something that's turned into more of a political issue now, Karen, drone sightings across the Northeast. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy and New York Governor Kathy Hochul are among state leaders demanding expanded authority to act against drones that could appear as a threat. But Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas tells ABC's This Week Americans will likely see more drones, but there is no evidence of foreign involvement or a national security risk.
I want to assure the American public that we are on it. We are working in close coordination with state and local authorities. And it is critical, as we all have said for a number of years, that we need from Congress additional authorities to address the drone situation.
Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas also says drone sightings may be increasing due to the Federal Aviation Administration deciding last year to allow nighttime drone flights.
Meanwhile, Nathan, at the White House, the Biden administration is planning to take action on land protections, clemency, and artificial intelligence in his final weeks in office. According to a memo to allies, the president's aiming to codify his legacy before President-elect Trump's inauguration. Trump's preparing a flurry of executive orders, some on his first day, that could take aim at key planks of the Biden agenda.
Let's turn back to markets now, Karen, because Bitcoin has hit another all-time high. The digital asset continues to soar on optimism over a second Trump administration, reaching another record high, surpassing $106,000. That advance also helped to boost sentiment in the wider crypto market. The president-elect is moving forward toward creating a friendly regulatory backdrop for digital assets and has backed the idea of a strategic national Bitcoin stockpile. And checking Bitcoin prices right now, they're off that 106 record now, trading at about $104,600.
Well, Nathan, we turn overseas now to the continued economic slowdown in China. China's retail sales growth unexpectedly weakened in November, despite signs of improvement in the housing market. City head of emerging market economies, Johanna Chua, said the data highlights the need for Beijing to introduce more measures to boost spending.
We really need to see actual consumption stimulus. I mean, what that we had so far this year has been very small. Targeted cash subsidies before the Golden Week or even the consumer trade-in programs. So I really expect going into 2025, which we've already seen the signal that we should get a larger fiscal stimulus with the composition much more skewed towards consumption.
And Citi's Johanna Chua says the global headwinds and uncertainty of a second Trump administration's policy does not instill confidence in jobs and income prospects in China.
And China's soft retail sales reading is weighing on oil as well, Karen. Crude slipped after advancing last week. Consumer weakness in China is reinforcing concerns over weakening demand, with the country's crude refining dipping to its lowest level in 5 months in November. Checking oil prices right now, NYMEX crude's down 1% at about $70.57 per barrel. Brent is down 0.8% at $73.93.
Well, Nathan, in Europe, we're getting a sense of monetary policy this morning. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde talked about the path for rate cuts while speaking in Lithuania today, saying she expects a further reduction in rates as the ECB approaches its 2% inflation target.
We are close to achieving our target. So we are no longer in a situation where we need to fix the policy horizon at the shortest possible transmission lag. We can return to a situation where the policy horizon can adjust depending on the nature, size, and persistence of the shock as needed.
ECB President Christine Lagarde adds that the central bank will keep monetary policy sufficiently restrictive for as long as necessary to reach its inflation target.
Staying overseas, Karen, let's get you updated on the political turmoil in South Korea. The country's parliament voted to impeach President Yoon Suk-yeol on Saturday following his brief martial law declaration. With Yoon's duties suspended, he now awaits a ruling from South Korea's constitutional court on whether he will be removed or restored to office. That decision can take up to 180 days from the passage of impeachment.
And finally, back at home, Nathan, an update on the deadly shooting of United Health CEO Brian Thompson. Police claim to have overwhelming evidence that suspected gunman Luigi Mangione fatally shot Thompson in Midtown Manhattan, with evidence including video footage, fingerprints, a weapon, and a manifesto decrying the healthcare industry. Mangione remains in a Pennsylvania jail fighting extradition to New York and hired high-powered New York defense attorney Karen Friedman Agnifilo to represent him. And she could argue an insanity defense or challenge the evidence and may consider a guilty plea to reduce his potential prison term. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Karen. Top advisor to New York City's mayor resigns, joining a wave of departures as a corruption probe tightens. Let's get more in this report this morning from Bloomberg's Jeff Bellinger.
Ingrid Lewis-Martin is one of Mayor Eric Adams' closest confidants and longest-serving aides. She is one of a dozen senior administration officials who have retired or resigned since late September, when Adams became the first New York City mayor in modern history to be indicted on federal corruption charges. Lewis-Martin has been scrutinized as part of the multiple investigations into Adams and his administration. Investigators seized her phone when she returned from a trip to Japan the day after the mayor was indicted. She is being investigated as part of a probe opened by the Manhattan District Attorney. I'm Jeff Bellinger, Bloomberg Radio.
Israel struck Syrian weapons depots and air defenses over the weekend in what appeared to be part of an effort Israel says is aimed at depriving extremists of military assets after the rebels seized power in Syria. In all, Israel struck its neighbor 75 times in attacks that began Saturday night near the Syrian capital, Damascus. Unionized Amazon workers at 2 New York warehouses gave leaders the authority to call a strike as soon as next week. It threatens a work stoppage unless the e-commerce giant comes to the bargaining table. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters gave Amazon a December 15th deadline to begin negotiating in earnest or face a strike of at least 5,500 workers just 10 days before Christmas. France's new Prime Minister, François Bayrou, is meeting with far-right leader Marine Le Pen today. It kicks off an effort to form a government that could push a budget through a divided parliament. The effort to form a government and craft a budget took on added urgency at Moody's ratings over the weekend cut France's credit rating, citing its weak finances and political gridlock. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm John Tucker, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, John, thank you. And it's time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. The NFL Sunday began with another flyover at MetLife Stadium, again directed at Giants owner John Mara. This one with the words, "Enough. We won't stop until you fire everyone." And then the Giants with a club record tying 9th loss in a row, unable to stop the Baltimore Ravens quarterback.
Jackson wants to throw, spreading to the right, spreads out. Now he goes deep. He's got a man wide open. Rashad Bateman has it at the 10. He's to the 5. Sidesteps the tackler. Touchdown, Ravens! Rashad Bateman on a beautiful catch from Lamar Jackson's throw.
On WBAL, one of 5 Jackson TD passes. Had more TD passes than incompletions. Baltimore beat the Giants 35-14. The Giants at QB started Tommy DeVito and then finished with Tim Boyle due to a DeVito concussion. They've now played 4 different QBs over the last 5 games, and none have played all that well. Giants are 2-12, 0-8 at home. The Jets with their 4th win, only the 2nd in the last 9 games. They won at Jacksonville 32-25. That's the most points they've scored all season. Aaron Rodgers, 3 TD passes, 2 to Devontae Adams, who had 198 receiving yards. Patriots dropped to 3-11, lost at Arizona 30-17. The Commanders a 20-19 win in New Orleans. The Saints scored on the final play, but got stopped on the game-winning 2-point conversion attempt. 2 late afternoon games that are possible Super Bowl previews. Buffalo won at Detroit 48-42 with Josh Allen in on 4 touchdowns. He was in on 6 last week. Jared Goff threw 5 TD passes in defeat. It's the Lions' first loss in 3 months. Philadelphia hasn't lost since September. The Eagles easily beat Pittsburgh 27-13. Kansas City stands alone, an NFL best 13-1. The Chiefs won 21-7 at Cleveland, though Patrick Mahomes left early with an ankle injury. Last night, Green Bay beat Seattle 30-13. Knicks won in Orlando 100-91. The Rangers' struggles continue. A 3-2 loss in St. Louis. The Islanders won 5-3 at Chicago. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. The wave of central bank decisions around the world crashes into the U.S. this week. The Fed begins its final policy meeting of 2024 tomorrow with the rate decision on Wednesday. And we're also going to hear from the Bank of Japan and the Bank of England before this final full trading week of 2024 is out. Here to get us set for it all, Bloomberg Radio and TV anchor Kriti Gupta. So, Kriti, it seems like a cut this week from the Fed is just about baked into this market. But the big question remains, what about 2025? Good morning.
Good morning, Nathan. Yeah, that seems to be the question. Goldman Sachs, for example, already saying that that's where you get a rate cut skip, for example. And remember, this was a really key strategy that the Fed had done on the way up where they were hiking. They said we would maybe hike, take a pause, hike again, and just give the economy a second to digest at a time when they need to act quickly, but not enough to kind of shock the system. And luckily, the economy was able to digest every single rate hike, even when they were, say, 50 basis points or 75 basis points or even 100 basis points. It feels like they may be doing the same thing on the way down. Now, I have no insight, no crystal ball, but that is something that Goldman Sachs is suggesting could be a possibility in terms of that strategy because it had worked on the way up as well. But Nathan, the concern, I think, is what happens if you suddenly get more inflation in 2025. That's when cutting is not the strategy that works.
What's to stop the Fed from going ahead and pausing this week? Is it just about the messaging that's been put out there that if they sort of gave the market a head fake like that it would cause even more volatility?
It's a really hard question. I can't see why, just given kind of the messaging that they've given so far, why there would be hesitation simply because when they have looked at things citing the labor market, for example, they've said there's been a lot of strength, but that they do want to ensure that strength continues and that there is still a lot of hikes kind of baked in the system. So even cutting that policy still leaves the Federal Reserve at a fairly restrictive level. They're just kind of creating a little bit of that headroom. So that's at least the argument that's been posed by a lot of these FOMC members when it comes to the labor market, even when it comes to the CPI. But Nathan, I imagine when you look at the commentary, that's where you need to see where their head is at, because in previous iterations of this, of these kind of concerns about economic resilience out of the United States, some members, some economists, even on Wall Street, including our very own Anna Wong at Bloomberg Economics, have pointed to cracks that are not in, say, your top tier markets, but are in smaller markets in the United States. Let me elaborate. The housing market has come up multiple times in that even though you're seeing some extreme property value jumps in New York, LA, Miami, etc., you are starting to see cracks in the likes of Seattle, in the likes of Dallas, and the likes of kind of the smaller markets that are maybe, say, tier 2 cities, for example. Another place you may see it is that some of the major industries have been laying off workers and not kind of replenishing that work supply. So you've seen it a lot in the IT industry. You've seen it a lot in kind of more public funded roles like teaching, for example. That's really where some of the data is starting to come up. But net, the numbers on wage growth, on CPI, on labor, even on housing prices have been positive. So when they're saying that they want to potentially cut rates, it's in response to not slowing any of that down, but perhaps creating a little bit more headroom where they may need it in 2025.
And just 30 seconds left. Is there a concern at the Fed that Trump policy is going to force them to stay more restrictive?
I mean, that's the highlight. That's the elephant in the room, right? The idea that in 2019, Jay Powell, one of the first things he did was cut interest rates when Donald Trump was talking about a trade war with China. It was the first inclination of it. And that actually worked because, again, it created more headroom. But the question is, do you create insurance rate cuts given that the lag could still be 12 to 18 months? And that's the strategy that no one has quite figured out yet.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.